Welcome, everyone. Going to give it a minute or two to allow everyone to join up. You're here for high impact, low effort automations. You're in the right spot. Yeah, Ricky, if you were on the UK roundtable, there was a little snafu where that got ended accidentally. But yeah, feel free to give me an email. I'm happy to expand on what I was saying. But hello, everyone. We're just going to give it another maybe 30 seconds or so, and then we're going to get going because we have a lot of content to get through. And let me just, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Well, if I can, I don't know if it's billy.davis@bullhorn.com. I don't know if I have a way to message everybody, but there it is. Okay. So welcome, everyone. Excited to dive into high impact, low effort automations. If you have any questions that pop up throughout the course of the webinar, feel free to utilize them in the Q&A. We're going to leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions to get through that. And if we're not able to get through everything, we'll make sure that those get answered and sent to you all as a follow-up item. But first things first, introduction to me. Hi, everyone. Billy Davis here. I've been automating and staffing since 2016, so going on eight years now. It's crazy to think. I was the first full-time HereFish employee. Back in the day, I was doing success, implementation, and support sometimes at the same time. And before being an employee, I was one of the first clients. And then actually before being a client, I was doing some of my own automating prior to that. So I've been automating and staffing a long time, doing some of my own custom API programming and things, even before staffing automation products existed. Over the course of my automation career, have done about 300 plus implementations, worked with over 1,000 different companies. So based on that experience, kind of what I've seen work, things to avoid, I like to disseminate that knowledge and kind of those best practices whenever I get the chance. And with that, I do a lot of thought leadership and content around automation and AI to help those on their own automation journeys. And then I'll throw a fun fact in here as well. I played and coached professional baseball for a couple years. Fastball topped out at 93 back in the day. I'm proud to say I can still get it about 86, 87 nowadays. So, of course, if anyone ever wants to talk baseball, I'm all ears. But I want to jump into kind of the content for the session here today. High impact, low effort automations. Because obviously there's lots of interest, especially when you're just starting out, to make sure you're doing things correctly, getting as much ROI as possible for your efforts. So the first thing that I want to kind of introduce or talk about is this concept of kind of prioritizing which automations you should build, from kind of a priority standpoint. So I like this matrix, I think is a good way to kind of talk through the concept. I've also seen this done in kind of an actual matrix form where you're assigning rankings to different things and then spitting out a result that will tell you which automations you should focus on. But the general idea here is, especially when you're first starting out with your automations, is you want to focus on high impact, low effort automations, because that's where you're going to get the biggest return for the amount of time and team resources that you're investing. Obviously, the red zone here, where you're getting no impact for either low or high effort, you want to avoid at all costs. And then things that are going to take a lot of effort but not yield a lot of impact, obviously you want to avoid and have those kind of way far down on your priority list from an automation perspective. So I'm going to walk through kind of how you can start thinking about impact but then also effort, as you're starting to kind of rank and prioritize these things. So impact, number one thing you should think about is this a repeatable kind of automation throughout your life cycle? So, for example, if you're doing a placement based, touch point or automation, that's going to happen for every placement that occurs in your business. So it's really repeatable. You're going to get a lot of value from that. So repeatable is automatically going to have a higher impact than one-off automations. So you want to focus on things that will occur over and over again. And obviously, lots of those things happen in the recruitment life cycles. And then you also want to think about how we're going to measure this. What are the metrics? Kind of what are the business outcomes that we can see improve? Because that's ultimately where a lot of impact comes from. So, give you an example. Redeployment as a high kind of impact automation. So one of the metrics you can look at is what's your redeployment rate? What are the percentage of contractors that get started on a new assignment after a certain time period? And of course, you can also then look at other metrics, business metrics like revenue, cost of candidate acquisition, lifetime placement value per candidate. All of those things obviously will get improved if you increase your redeployment rate. So impact, if you can measure it, obviously you go a long ways to being able to show what that impact is. And then on the effort side of the equation, one of the first things you want to think about is there a blueprint available for this automation that you can either use out of the box or customize slightly either content or steps to kind of get your automation use case done for you? If there is, that saves a lot of steps in your process. So obviously that lowers the effort considerably. And then the other kind of key effort thing you want to think about is how much does your kind of day-to-day process change, from the recruiter consultant side of things because of this automation. So if you're doing an automation that doesn't require any change, right? So just some data is updating automatically in the system, right? That automatically is going to be a lower effort automation because your recruiters and consultants don't have to change anything that they're doing. Whereas if you're doing an automation that requires a recruiter to enter a certain note or certain kind of field update, and that's a new thing, right? Then you have to add in kind of the change management process and kind of incorporate that into the effort calculation here. And of course, you don't need to be perfect in your rankings and your prioritization. Getting kind of close to it or getting estimations often can be really helpful. Just giving you an idea of, where things are in your order, in your prioritization, so you can get the most return from your automation efforts. Some additional priority tips that you can think about here. Start with close to the dollar improvements. And this is especially true if kind of data quality is a concern. So think of, close to the dollar, meaning close to the placement or close to like new job orders, things like that. So things that will directly kind of increase revenue or kind of some easily trackable metrics. So, improving retention on placements leads to more revenue. Getting more job orders leads to more placement, leads to more revenue. Increasing your redeployment, get you more placements, get you more revenue. So those close to the dollar activities can be a lot easier to measure impact from. And a great place to start. Repeatable and at scale are your friends, especially from an impact perspective. So like we mentioned earlier, things that happen over and over again throughout the life cycles of recruitment, always a great way to improve or find kind of efficiencies. And then at scale is also always going to be a better benefit than if things are kind of more one-off. So, improving your, submission process, for example, improving your client send-outs, improving your interviews, all of these things happen at scale, which will kind of compound the benefits of automations, especially as time continues. And then lastly, you want to avoid hyper customization. So, especially I've seen this the case where recruiters might be a little anxious about automation or their day-to-day process, and they'll kind of request that, well, I do things this way, so I want a custom automation just for my own workflow. You want to avoid that, especially at the beginning. You want to find things that you can standardize, things that you can roll out as a singular automation for the company or a group. You're going to find, obviously a lot more benefits there than having to create a custom automation for each and every recruiter or consultant. So with that, going to jump into some use case examples that generally fall into this high impact, low effort kind of bucket. I'm going to give kind of a brief description of them, and there's a lot to run through. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, but this will also be a good resource once the recording is shared, that you can kind of go back through and think of, are we doing these things? And if not, how can we do so? So re-engagement, obviously really typically a valuable automation. The idea here is you're getting in contact with candidates that you've lost touch with, which is a lot of your database. If you look at the data and look at the numbers, my recommendation on starting out here is focus on candidates that you know are going to be more placeable than others. So think of candidates that you've placed in the past that are still in a good standing, assuming they didn't have a negative end on the placement side, or think even of candidates that you've submitted to a job, sent out, interviewed, etc. You can re-engage those segments. Your recruiters are going to be really excited to talk to those folks because typically they're also going to be placeable for additional things that you have going on right now. Another really high impact automation, and typically low effort, is around top talent reminders. So this is kind of the idea of what's even better than re-engaging top talent is not letting top talent need to be re-engaged with at all. So, again, even if you don't have a process or kind of a field or something that indicates or can categorize candidates into kind of tiers and buckets, if you don't, I'd encourage you to think about that. How can you create data entry in your system so that you know who are your top candidates? But even if you don't have that, you can look at candidates that you've placed in the past, candidates you sent out in the past, and just putting in reminders, alerts, notifications when those individuals kind of lapse in communication. So one example of that is if a top talent candidate who's still active or available hasn't had a note in 2 weeks, let's send a reminder to the recruiter just to kind of bring them top of mind so that they don't kind of slip through kind of your database and into the arms of one of your competitors. NPS surveys, really good to use. Not only is this a great mechanism to capture feedback and understand kind of where some experience bottlenecks are, but then also you can use kind of the results of the surveys to then inform what you do next. People that are really happy with your process, you can ask for referrals, testimonials, or reviews, and improve that kind of social score, and anywhere that you want to point them. People that are really upset, you have an opportunity to try to fix that problem before it spreads like wildfire. And the people in the middle, obviously, you can ask what you could do better to make their experience better. But really valuable. Obviously, there's lots of touch points that you can utilize NPS surveys for. I'd encourage you to think about what are the key stages in your life cycles, and oftentimes you want to partner that with an NPS survey. So think of your candidate intake, your candidate screening, getting submitted to a client, interview stage, placement. It just has some common examples that you can utilize NPS surveys and get some great intel. And then lastly, something that can be really helpful, especially as you're encouraging your recruitment teams to utilize the database more, is to use automation to clean up your statuses. The biggest one that I always see is how many candidates in your system have a place status that aren't in an active placement. If you don't have automation, that tends to be a very high number. And then the double whammy of that one is if a candidate status is placed, they're not searchable when a recruiter is searching the system. But the ideal kind of way to use status, in my opinion, is to indicate where someone is in their journey. If you can use automation to enforce definitions, you can build a lot of confidence that if somebody is active, somebody's available, somebody's employed passive, et cetera, you know exactly what those things mean. Jumping to some client contact automations. If you're not doing this first one, you're leaving money on the table. So following up with clients that were clients in the past, but you're not currently doing business with, right? So find either clients that you've had placements with or jobs in the past that you haven't had a job or placement with in X amount of time. Of course, you can add parameters to make sure the company's in a good standing and the client contact's still active or still there. But you do this right, you get a perpetual influx of warm leads that will convert to jobs and placements. Next, similar to candidates, NPS surveys, again, all of those kind of key life cycle touch points, gather that feedback, use it, and find ways to improve. Another really good aspect for automation is utilizing kind of the journey or kind of drip campaign mechanism to kind of sustain and encourage your BD and sales cycle. So thinking about it from a lead to a qualified lead to having a signed contract or a job order to placement, and all the different stages throughout, you can use automation to ensure that someone's not stuck in a stage for too long. But then you're also sending them relevant content for each step of that journey cycle. Another good way that you can use automation too is, on that qualification side, you could utilize automation to do some basic qualification and also set up, like for example, a calendar invite automatically so that it gets on your BD rep's calendar, in an easy way from the client side of things. And then similar, to that, you can qualify and convert website leads, so getting that top of the funnel side of things firing, ensuring that they're a good fit for the type of recruiting that you're after or the kind of the ideal client profile that you identify. And then passing those kind of website leads to the appropriate team or person to ensure that they're followed up upon and actioned, right? And then kind of entering them into that BD or sales journey cycle. Jumping into submission use case ideas. Application and status updates. This is usually the first place to start. If you're not sending an application confirmation, meaning somebody applies to a job and they don't hear from you, you want to ensure that you have that figured out. That's the age-old complaint about staffing is I applied to a job and never heard back. You want to make sure that you have that in a good spot. And then I also like the idea of providing, kind of status alerts of where that application is throughout the process. Is it getting reviewed? Is it getting, are you waiting on the client for feedback? Obviously, are they, is there information sent out to the client? Are they interviewing? Giving updates proactively on where somebody is. And of course, when a job closes down, letting them know that opportunity is no longer available is a great way to, provide a good application experience. Silver medalists, again, this is an automation. If you're not doing, you're leaving money on the table. Obviously, from the recruitment side of things, you're trained and incentivized to, follow through, with the folks they're making it to a placement. Oftentimes, the silver medalists or the people that were sent out or interviewed but weren't placed don't get communicated with, or if they do, it's very delayed. So you can deploy an automation to follow up with those folks that weren't selected to make a placement, but obviously were quality enough to be sent out or interview. Be a great way to kind of nurture them, provide additional job recommendations there, and just give them that feedback in a speedy way to ensure you're providing a good experience. Process delay alerts is one of the best ways you can reduce your time to hire and time to fill. My best example of that is if you send out a candidate to a client and they remain in that client send out status for a day or 2 days or whatever time frame that you identify, you could have a reminder, go to the job owner, whomever you want internally, to follow up on that, just to ensure you eliminate any unnecessary delays in the process. And then lastly here, qualification surveys can be really crucial, especially if you get a lot of high volume kind of applications. Just putting some basic qualifications. If you set this up the right way, you can also make these qualifications dynamic to the job. So asking 2 to 3 knockout questions. Do you have the basic requirements from a experience standpoint? If it's a on-site job, are you within a reasonable geographic distance? Do you have the necessary certifications, credentials, et cetera, depending upon the type of recruitment? You can deploy that. And then if someone obviously passes through that qualification, that can get passed to a recruiter so that they know that person's met the bare minimum requirements. And it's not going to be a waste of time to kind of reach out to them. And then if someone doesn't, obviously you can let them know that they don't meet that threshold. This job's not going to be a good fit for them, but it can be a great way to increase efficiency. And then updating candidate data, again, kind of improving data quality is always a good idea, but utilizing submission information to fill in missing gaps in the candidate record is something really valuable. So things like, if the candidate doesn't have a job title, let's copy the job title that they applied to that. We can make that inference. So, close to data is better than no data. Do the same concept with pay rates, skills, categories, any of those types of fields. Have your data update itself. Jumping into placements, redeployment. It's one of the first ones we implement for so many clients for a good reason. Getting your already onboarded and placed candidates to another placement. There's no really higher impact than that from a revenue and efficiency perspective. So deploying that to ensure that you're trying to redeploy as many of your candidates as possible, really helpful if you do any contract or temporary placements. Placement touch points is good for all types of placements, even kind of the direct hire. Just ensuring that things are going okay. Nurturing throughout the placement, you'll typically increase retention. You'll find out problems, before they become huge problems, but then also kind of have an opportunity to nurture that relationship, to develop it into a long-term relationship. Onboarding reminders, similar kind of concept here to the submission, delay things. You want to make the onboarding process as smooth as possible. Ensure, obviously, from a compliance and your back office perspective, that everything's getting done. But anything you can do there to ensure that everything's moving along as it should, really helpful. And then lastly, updating candidate data again, when the placement end date happens, moving that to the candidate date available, job title, copying that over, pay rates, copying that over, all that information just to keep your candidate data up to date, really helpful, especially as you're looking to redeploy or reactivate that person in the future. And then lastly here, looking at jobs. So new job alert, this one can be pretty simple, but also very powerful. Just letting your recruitment teams know and disseminating that information whenever a new job that's relevant to them is created can be really helpful. And again, reduce that time to fill because your recruiters can get on it right away. Low activity alerts is a really interesting concept where, especially if you're doing, different SLAs, if you're doing retained search where you have, certain expectations that you need to meet within a certain time frame, you can set up these alerts that if a certain job order doesn't have X amount of submissions or doesn't have X amount of client sendouts or candidate interested or whatever that you want to do, you can set up alerts and reminders to let the teams know, but you could also escalate that to leadership as well to make it a priority. So can be really helpful, especially for high priority jobs or high kind of margin jobs. You can ensure that those things are getting worked on and getting escalated to your teams appropriately. Onboarding reminders, again, kind of similar to the placement side of things. It's just ensuring everything is firing through, and the job is progressing as it should. Unpublishing jobs can be a massive one. I've seen clients save thousands of dollars a month just by unpublishing a job from a third-party site as soon as it's filled, just to kind of lower the clicks and things from a job that's actually no longer available. And then lastly here, there's an asterisk for a reason, AI auto match. And number one, it's an enterprise automation feature. So not all of you might have it, but certainly is a good reason to upgrade. It's also something that requires some effort to set up, especially and configure the right way. But if you do, the impact of it can be monumental. And kind of the quick idea on it is as soon as a job opens up, you can automatically find up to 50 candidates that match it. And if your data quality is in a good spot, those matches those recommendations can be really, really good. Then you can also add your own logical constraints to make sure that the desired pay rate of the candidate is in the same range as the pay rate of the job, for example, or that certain things are matching on the candidate and job side, just to hone in that match even better. That group of up to 50 matched recommended candidates can be sent to the recruiter. They can also be automatically submitted. And of course, becoming automatically submitted, that allows the opportunity to then kick off an automated communication from automation around that submission. So we have clients that are leveraging this, using it. Job comes in within 30 minutes to an hour. They have 20 to 50 recommended candidates getting reached out to. Are you interested? Combine that with a qualification survey. All of a sudden, when the recruiter kind of sees candidate's interested, the candidate knows about the job, they meet the bare minimum threshold of it. Can be an amazing way to increase efficiency on the recruitment side. So with that, we'll jump into questions. It looks like we have a few. So we'll jump in here. So the first one up is around access to the lead entities, kind of, when that is going to be an option. Exciting news, that's happening actually very, very soon. I can't give an exact date, or our product would be quite upset with me. I have seen a sneak peek of it and getting very excited. So stay tuned, stay connected with your account manager. But that's something that obviously it'll still go kind of through a beta process first before it gets launched to everyone, just to ensure that everything's in a good spot. But look for that in the very near future. Any use cases around getting submission feedback? Some I've seen some. I think like the best things that I've seen, that automation does is just ensuring that you're reducing those gaps in between kind of reviewing or getting that feedback. And then I've also seen some really cool marketplace partners that help with kind of this process. So if you're interested, I'd encourage you to check out like 3DIQ, Candidly, for example. Adro has HireDeck. There's a few products in the ecosystem now that are getting around this kind of submission, getting feedback quickly, but something that can be really helpful to getting kind of that thumbs up, thumbs down on your submissions, and then getting that feedback right quickly into the hands of your applicants. Okay. Another one here is around kind of job categories and a huge number of them. So it's really difficult to get candidates to update it. Yeah, because obviously having a drop down of 100 or 200 values, right, becomes a nightmare. Nobody's ever going to fill that out. So the questions around like how would you manage that? Would you create a second field, design an automated way to update the field? So how I would think about this is, starting to think about what are there any similarities that you can group the job categories together? My suspicion is if you have 100 or 200 of them, several of them are duplicative or you could combine together. And then the other thing I would recommend thinking about is thinking of the hierarchy that exists or could exist inside the system, where you have, industry, category, skill, specialties, right? Like all of those nest inside of the ATS system. So anything that you're kind of passing to a candidate, I would keep as high level as possible, just so that they don't get bombarded with all of these choices of 100 or 200 options. So obviously you want to keep things short and sweet and simple, 6, 8 options at most, and ideally kind of 3 or 4 of what things they're interested in. This is also where it can help, where you copy that information from a submission or a placement, right? And getting that stuff over. But I would definitely recommend consolidating whenever possible there, because also just maintaining it becomes much, much easier. Question around status cleanup, around that place status, even if they aren't at a place company, what would that automation look like? I do have a tutorial on our Bullhorn Automation YouTube page that walks through this step exactly, but the criteria literally would be candidate status is placed and placement status is not approved, active, whatever you're using to indicate an active placement. That's how you'd find that segment, and then you just flip that placed candidate status as an automation step back to available or lead or whatever that you want to from a kind of more accurate perspective. Question around if the company entity is still in the works. The answer to that is yes. I don't know the exact timeline. I know Leads is going to be the first kind of new entity that's going to be introduced. Opportunities and companies, to my understanding, is in the works. That priority ranking was done on purpose, just looking at some of the data on how often those things are used or some of the use cases. So I would recommend, especially if you're interested in the company entity, contact your account manager, kind of gather the use cases or ideas that you want to do. And that'll also increase your likelihood of getting into the early access beta and getting your hands on it before anyone else. Another question is around they don't have any job boards because they don't want their jobs public. Could automation still be useful? Yes, for sure. Especially those kind of internal efficiencies around jobs can be really helpful. But then even just communicating some details about the job from things in the ATS system, even if it doesn't exist on a job board externally, that's something that you can still do on the candidate side of things, and make happen. So I think I covered all the questions. But love it. If you come up with anything in the future, let me know. I hope to see many of you tomorrow. We have another webinar happening at the same time. But thank you all for joining. And then, of course, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, feel free to do so. Every day at 11 o'clock, I release a staffing automation post. Today's was actually about the automation priority matrix, so very relevant to the content here today. It has some specific examples if you want to dive a little bit deeper in that. And then also I'd encourage you, if you're interested in kind of a deeper dive on best practices, tutorials, check out my automation newsletter. Link is there below. Go through the historical things there. Lots of great things on more of a deep dive tutorial and training perspective. But I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Thursday. And for those of you I see tomorrow, looking forward to it. Thanks.